Welcome in to the 14 on this very snowy, wintry day, at least where we are in the Nashville area, probably where you are too, judging by weather reports around the country. Hope everyone is safe. And Blake Lovell joins me today. He is also inside from the snowy conditions where he is. Blake, it's a good time of the year to watch basketball. And boy, we had two games last night that leave us with some things to talk about for sure.
We did, Chris. It was a big game, as we said, for Arkansas. Another one after they had gotten the big win against Missouri. And we thought that, if they can just get another win like that against a quality team, it would only help their resume, and that's exactly what they did. But then for Missouri, not so good trip to Athens as they just ran into a situation where, playing without Jeremiah Tillman again, Georgia gets the best of them, and Missouri probably trending in the wrong direction right now, while Arkansas certainly trending in the right direction.
Let's start with the Razorbacks. I had mentioned on a podcast, I think it was Tuesday, that LSU was probably the premier team in the conference when it came to having 4 or 5 guys who could really score. Arkansas might want a word in that conversation. I mean, we know about Moses Moody and Justin Smith. Both those guys had really good games. Last night, Jalen Tate's been so consistent. Connor Vanover has given them a lot of things. But last night, Arkansas gets 75 points against a really good Florida defense, despite Desi Sills having, no points, and J.D. Note having 2. Now, Note averages 12.5, and Sills averages 9.6. That's what's really scary about this team, Blake, is they've got so many guys who can get the job done, and they don't need them all going on the same night, apparently, to beat a really good team.
Yeah, they've got that mix, and I think that's what Eric Musselman likes with his teams, and we've talked about him as sort of the transfer guy over the years and someone who's able to go out and get the transfers. But it's clear, he likes to blend having older, experienced players, which on this group, would be Justin Smith, would be Jalen Tate, guys like that, going along with, these younger guys who are up and coming, rising stars that, again, some of these guys can have a chance to play at the next level. And so I think that's what he's done so well with this roster is, it's not just a roster like we've talked about with some of the others where they've almost found themselves in a predicament where they've either got a lot of underclassmen or, it's a situation where they just don't have enough experience. And I think this team just kind of has that perfect blend of it. And, I kept saying throughout, going throughout the non-conference play into the conference play that it was hard to get a read on Arkansas because I didn't really think just yet that they had kind of come together as a unit, but it made sense because they had so many different guys that they're plugging in now, whether it's transfers, whether it's freshmen, to where it was going to take them a little while, and not having the strongest non-conference schedule, which I'm just going to say again, I don't fault Arkansas for that because I think scheduling was just an absolute, whatever words you want to insert into what it's been like for coaches trying to schedule this year. But I just didn't think we learned a whole lot about them in non-conference play. But now, as they've gone along, they couldn't find ways to beat those quality NCAA tournament teams, however long ago you want to look at it now, a month ago. But now I think they're starting to find those ways. They're figuring those things out. They're coming together. The chemistry's there. And I think that's allowed them to get on this, 7-game winning streak in SEC play. And this is one of the more dangerous teams in the league right now. And I don't think anyone would want to play Arkansas at this point.
Well, a lot was made of Eric Musselman's shirtless post-game celebration over the weekend, but I think it's appropriate, man. The Hogs are going streaking. This is, 7 in a row in the league?
Yeah, 7 in a row in the league, and I've got an Eric Musselman story for you. You remember when they, his Nevada team, what was that? I don't remember the year, but when they played here in the NCAA tournament several years ago, what was it? They had the 2 games, like both the games were just insane. Was it Texas and Cincinnati? I want to say maybe they had that crazy
Cincinnati
comeback.
For sure. Yeah.
They had the crazy comeback in I think they actually came back in both of those games, but I think it was the Cincinnati one where they had to rally all the way back. And after that game, I'm sitting there, right courtside on press row, just literally on the floor like they have it in Nashville when they do these tournaments. And who comes running right after the game? As soon as they made a big play at the end, I don't remember if it was a stop or a score or what, but Eric Musselman comes running over because the Nevada fan base is sitting right behind us where we're at. and he jumps right on the table directly in front of me. I've got my laptop here. Eric Musselman's feet are basically straddling my laptop here as he comes up and jumps on the table. That's when I knew that this guy, if he ever came to the SEC, he would easily be one of my favorites, because the passion and just the jumping up and down on tables, the shirtless streaking, this guy does it all. But guess what? When you're 17-5 right now with this team, you can do whatever you want, because the Hogs are playing really, really well.
I think Marshall Henderson's the only other guy I remember pulling that off too.
Yes, and I think he got a bit of a different reaction when he tried to do it at different locations, not in Oxford. So I think the signals from the crowd were a little bit different than what Musk got from the Nevada faithful there.
Yeah, Marshall Henderson usually got a different reaction with just about everything. But one thing that pops off the page from last night, Devontae Davis, Arkansas's freshman guard, not a guy that we've talked about a lot, if at all, leads him in scoring, 18 points, leads him in plus minus at plus 17. I mean, I just look at this team. We've talked about how Tennessee, maybe 1 through 7 or 8, is the best team in the league. But, man, Arkansas, again, this is the team that's making a charge. And like you said, the team that maybe we saw back in November and the team that this is now seem to be two different things, and that's what makes them such an attractive pick if you're looking for a team to make a deep run in March that maybe isn't on the national radar right now.
Something else I like about them, we always talk about KenPom on this podcast, and we look at other metrics too, but if you look at Arkansas and KenPom, like find one thing that Arkansas just does just awful at. Like, they don't have one thing. If you just look at the stats, like, they're not completely horrible in one area, or they have a clear weakness that you can see just by the numbers, which, again, KenPom's numbers, like, it covers a lot of ground. So they don't really have a ton of just weaknesses where you can say, all right, we know we can attack that one area for Arkansas because they are just terrible in that area. Like, they do a lot of things pretty well. And I think that's something else, too, that they have going for them is, there's not just a couple different things. They are really good at doing a lot of things well. And I think a team like that, even if maybe they don't completely specialize in one specific area, which there are some things that they do well, on both sides of the court, but I think just because they have that versatility to be able to do just a lot of different things, and they have that, like we said, the balance on offense and the different guys they can go to 7, 8, 9 deep, whatever. I think that makes them a very intriguing team here as we get closer to tournament style play.
Yeah, I do too. One thing that was funny last night in that game, I think, was it Carl Ravitch and Jimmy Dykes who were calling it?
Yeah.
Did you see Connor Vanover's 2 free throws?
When was that? Was it first half or second half?
It was second half. And my goodness, those guys were trying like crazy not to jinx the no-hitter. And they did it. Vanover not missed a foul shot all year.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, okay. I know what you're talking about now. Okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to think what stood out for me were they talking to Muss's mom? Was that who they had on the phone at one point? That's what I took away from their broadcasting in this game, because that was a conversation. So
that was a conversation. That was a very interesting conversation at that. But let's move to Florida for a minute. The Gators, you and I talked about this before the podcast. I don't know what's going on with their rotation because, man, a month ago I looked at them and I just thought with Lewis and Appleby and Locke, and, man, they started to find those 4 guards who were really giving them something. Colin Castleton has been great for them this year, just kind of out of the blue the last 6 weeks. Omar Payne has done well filling in at the times that Castleton has missed games. And I thought that was a team that was really settling in on 7 or 8 guys that they could roll with without Keontae Johnson. Now I just watched this constant parade of subs last night, and Scotty Lewis has lost some playing time. Now, he fouled out last night in 15 minutes. That had something to do with it. But I kind of thought this team was forming in an identity and a direction. And I'm not saying this to be critical. There may be reasons for it. But I'm looking at some of these guys that are getting 6 to 12 minutes for Florida, and it's really not what I expected when we saw Florida really start to get some traction a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I think, it's been up and down for them. And, I think the whole Scotty Lewis thing, I want to say he didn't play for, what was it, either 4 or 5 games. And, Florida had basically said it was for health and safety precautions. So you assume, I mean, whatever, like that's just something that they were not going to take a chance with, for whatever reason with that, which makes sense. And I think, with someone like Colin Castleton, who had been dealing with an ankle injury and that kind of stuff. And so their rotation has certainly just kind of been all over the place, like you said. And I think it's just because, they've had to adjust on the fly. And, we could go back all the way to the Keontae Johnson thing and just kind of how that's completely changed probably how Florida has wanted to play this season, because he was going to be such a huge part of what they did really on both sides of the court, given his versatility. So I think it has been, at times, as we've talked about before, I mean, it's been a frustrating season, I think, for Florida, just in terms of their play on the court, but, obviously bigger things off the court. But this is just a team that I'm kind of right there with you. I don't know what to make of them at this point. And I still just look at them and say, okay, I feel like Arkansas has kind of eclipsed them now, to where it's like, okay, which team do you trust more? I think we trust Arkansas more than probably Florida at this point, because for when they get some of these wins, and look, they've got some good wins on their resume, like the Tennessees, the West Virginia, the LSU, even the Ole Miss one, obviously looking better now. But then they just have some of these games like that one, like we said, against South Carolina, and then to have to take that break, that's something else too. Let's remember, I mean, they're basically been off for 2 weeks before they played that Arkansas game on Tuesday night. We've talked about the data at teams that are at disadvantages when they have these 2+ week type pauses. And that's something too that I think that comes into play here. And for whatever reason, it factors into games, and it's just something to where I think they've got some things to figure out the rest of the way heading into the NCAA tournament. Because, I mean, right now, I think Florida's going to be fine in terms of the NCAA tournament, but you know what? Some of these games are not looking as easy as maybe they once did even a couple weeks ago. They've got Georgia next, then they've got to go to Auburn, got to go to Kentucky, and then Missouri at home. So really, I think you talk about wide ranges of possibilities to how a team finishes the season. Those 4 teams they have on the schedule are very unpredictable. So I'm not exactly sure what we could say could be maybe what we expect from Florida here in these final 4 games.
I feel like unpredictable describes the whole league at this point, outside of Arkansas and Alabama.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's, yeah.
I mean, back to last night, okay? Maybe this is searching for an explanation and trying to make sense of something just because that's what we like to do, right? But Florida likes to play at a faster tempo. And I wonder if going into Arkansas, on Arkansas's home floor, like you said, had been off for a while, and it was a 72 possession game, according to Ken Pom. Maybe not the best idea to play Arkansas's kind of game on its turf. Again, I don't know that that's even a fair criticism, because, right, Florida players talk about how they like it and how it's worked for them, but maybe just a bad matchup for Florida.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's just, they're a team that I thought coming into the season, if you kind of just look at how they play, they're just, I don't know, like they even were, for me, a hard team to figure out coming into the season, because you looked at sort of what their identity was and you tried to figure out, okay, how are they going to play? Because we knew that they were, from a playing style standpoint, like Florida was going to try to play a bit faster this season. They wanted to be able to speed up, because if you look at their numbers, over the years, they have played traditionally at one of the slowest tempos in the SEC, and really at times like one of the slower tempos in the country. But they've sped things up so much this year, and I think again, obviously having Keontae Johnson in would be a big difference, because he was the preseason SEC Player of the Year. But without him, they just at times don't have, it seems like, that next punch that they need to be able to break through in some of these games. But also, like we said, they've shown they can do it though in some of these. So it to me, it goes back to what I think has been sort of the overarching theme for Mike White since he's been there, and that's that this team is just, it lacks consistency seemingly year in and year out. And I think that's the biggest problem with Florida, is for some reason they just have never kind of found that next gear when it comes to just being a very consistent team from start to finish. And that, I think, has played a big role in them kind of being, whatever you want to call it, whether you want to call it average, a little above average at times. They did make, an Elite Eight, all that stuff. But I think that's where probably the frustration comes in if you're a Florida fan, is that you see what this team is capable of, what the program's capable of. But then, you see those games like they had at Mississippi State or against South Carolina, ones like that. And I think that's where you look and say, okay, what do we have to do to get to that next level?
Were you surprised Missouri goes into Georgia and loses by 10?
I will say that I don't want to think that I was completely surprised that they lost. I think how they lost was probably the bigger thing for me because, they lead at halftime. I thought the times that they actually played pretty well, but I think the way that game played out in the second half, that was surprising to me because I think if you're a Missouri team, knowing that you're already kind of reeling a little bit because you've lost back-to-back games to Ole Miss and Arkansas. You need to really get a win. I mean, again, it's crazy to think, what was it, probably however many days ago, they're a top 4 seed in the initial NCAA tournament bracket or seeding release. And now, here they are really in need of a win, or they're going to start spiraling down. And look, I don't know. Does it go back to that discussion we had about the difference in the numbers and the actual resume? Because it looks like the numbers at this point are starting to play out, and understand maybe why the numbers were against Missouri at times, because losing these 3 games, not ideal for sure.
Well, they're down to 51 in Ken Palm this morning.
Yeah.
But let's be fair, too. Jeremiah Tillman has missed 2 straight games.
Yep.
And I don't know if he's their best player, but he's in that conversation. And I have to think that really hurt Missouri last night.
Well, and like you said, it's not that maybe he's the guy. We're going to look at Xavier Pinson and we're going to look at Drew Smith and guys like that probably first. But I think in terms of guys who can change the game on both sides of the court, whether it's, defense, blocking shots, rebounding, scoring in the paint, I mean, Jeremiah Tillman is a big factor. And I think not having him there, that is something, like you said, that certainly played a role, I think, in these past couple games. And, he's going to be a key. If they want to have any success in the tournament, he's going to have to play a role. And I think we understand that just based on how he plays. So it's still a frustrating loss, I'm sure, because, again, I look at this team and say they should be winning games like this. And I also think about, once again, it seems like for Missouri at times, the double-digit leads are the worst thing they can get, because all of a sudden, they're up, what was it, probably, 5 minutes into the second half. I think they were up 13, 14, something like that. And then it's like, to have the game flip on them the way that it did, and we saw that against Alabama, but Georgia's not Alabama. And I think that's where you look at it and say, is it more a Missouri thing here? Is it more of a Georgia thing? I think it's probably a little bit of both, because we've seen Georgia. I mean, we kind of know, they have picked up some wins that have maybe surprised you a little bit in terms of them being able to sweep Ole Miss and stuff like that. But this, again, was also a team that just came off giving up 115 points to Alabama, and then they turn around and Missouri is not able to kind of get any offense going. So I think that's something, too, to where that's where you look at this and say that it's a missed opportunity for Missouri.
Are we worried about Missouri missing the tournament? I think they're going to get in. I don't know what the net is today. I'll look that up in a minute. But, I mean, they get South Carolina on the road, Ole Miss at home, Texas A&M at home, allegedly. With A&M just haven't been a lot of games lately. And then Florida on the road. Boy, that's not easy, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Carolina, you never know what you're going to get. You don't want to play Ole Miss right now. And I think going to Gainesville to play Florida, I suspect if Missouri pulls an 8-8 out of this, and then I guess you've got some makeup games later, Vandy would be one of those. That's where you can probably pick up a win. May come down to, do they get in some of these games against some of these lower level teams?
Well, they were a 5 seed in Lenardi's bracket heading into that game against Georgia. You've got to assume that's going to knock them down a seed line at least. And then, let's say they go and play at South Carolina on Saturday and lose that one. I mean, that drops you another seed line at least. So I still think in that realm, they're probably still okay. But like for example, as and this is like this goes back to what we said before. We can project all this, but you also have to remember, like, you can't lose out and feel good about your chances. And for Missouri, unfortunately, they've lost three in a row here. So if they were to lose a fourth in a row at South Carolina, then you're really starting to say, okay, we're okay right now, but we don't want to, all of a sudden have to play an Ole Miss team next that's really needing wins, and that's another potential. They just beat us, all that stuff, and I don't know. It gets a little tricky. So I think if you're Missouri and you go 2-2 in these four, and like you said, you've still got makeup games too in there, you should be fine. I don't think there's going to be any issue. But I also think that if you for some reason you go 0-4 in these last four, and you have losing 7 straight games to finish off the regular season, or go 1-3, and maybe the only team you beat is Texas A&M, then I think you probably start getting a little nervous. But even then, I don't know. I still think their body of work's pretty good, because I guess for the most part, this Georgia loss was really only their second, what you would classify as probably just a bad loss, I guess. But and I don't know if it's bad. It's just one of those where when you compare it to the others, like losing to Tennessee or Arkansas or Ole Miss, it's not as it's worse than those. But I think they're going to be fine. But again, like we said, it's also you can't put it in the hands of the committee or other teams playing their way in, and have to say, okay, well, this team just went on a hot streak and won 4 of their last 5 games to play their way into the tournament. Let's compare them to Missouri, who just lost 7 in a row or 6 of 7 to finish the regular season, and maybe lost their first game in the NCAA or the SEC tournament. So you just don't want to put yourself in that scenario.
Well, I think big wins bail them out again. We've
Yeah.
talked about how their resume is pretty gaudy when you look at who they've beaten, and there's only 5 teams with more quad 1 wins than Missouri. And 3 of those are probably number 1 seeds if you seed the field today. So, no, there's a few more teams with 5, but man, not many. Who's in there? West Virginia's got 5. Oklahoma's got 5. And is that it? So, I mean, you're in pretty rare territory where there aren't 10 teams in the country that have piled up the quality of wins that you have. And plus, I have to think that if it gets dicey, the Jeremiah Tillman absence, which was related to a death in the family, I would think that gets brought up too. And one of those losses was to Arkansas in overtime. So I think Missouri's safe, but the net today is down to 43.
Yeah, I think the only scenario, like I said, I think I could see where if you're a Missouri fan, you start getting a little nervous is if they were to lose out, which I just don't anticipate this team, losing 7 in a row to finish the regular season. So I just don't see that happening. And if it does, then again, maybe I can understand certainly getting a bit nervous about where things could fall, knowing that there are other teams around the country that could play their way in and start stealing bids and all that. So I think they're going to be okay though, because Illinois, a huge win. As we said, Tennessee, Alabama. Teams like that. That's in Arkansas. The Arkansas one certainly looks better now too, getting that one back in early January. So I think they're going to be fine. But you just don't want to put yourself in. Again, this is a team that was just in the top 4 in the seeding here midway through February. You don't want to all of a sudden just have a terrible finish to the season, and you look up and you somehow fell into that 8-9 game, getting ready to play Gonzaga in the second round. Like it's just if you're this team having such a good season, you just don't want it to kind of finish that way. So I can understand the frustrations there too.
Well, I think just get to 500 in the league, right? I think the
Yeah.
optics of that, in what's a pretty strong league, then they'll be fine. Now, if you 7-9, 8-9, how many ever games they wind up playing, maybe that's when they get into dangerous territory. But I think if they can just be 500 or above in the SEC, and frankly, with the wins they banked, I don't think it matters where they get them at this point. Just get to 500, and I think your ticket is punched if you're Missouri.
Yep, I think they'll be fine. And again, because they should be the favorite in. I mean, realistically, they probably should be the favorite in 3 of their final 4 that are on the schedule right now. Like you said, still have to make up some games, but they should be favored to probably win at South Carolina. Although that's another game. I kind of look at that one as this Georgia game where I don't know. That's going to be one I think could be a coin flip when you look at it going into it. But then, a potential revenge spot at home against Ole Miss, playing Texas A&M, they should be able to have a chance to win 2 of the 3 there. I think winning at Florida may be tough at this point, but I think they're going to be fine.
How about Georgia sitting there at 6-8? Now, games against Florida and LSU coming up, but I don't think any of us expected that at this point.
Now, Georgia's they're another one that it's just been a strange season, I think, for them, because I've never really felt like I've fully invested in Georgia as a team that could really kind of disrupt things. Again, like we're talking about with Missouri and Ole Miss and teams like that, but sure enough, like they've done that, and they've beaten Kentucky, they've won at Auburn. I don't know, like they've been one too that kind of when you look at it, I mean, I don't know, like they're another team that I just didn't have high expectations for coming into the season because I didn't know exactly what this team would look like. Minus Anthony Edwards, I didn't know what things were going to look like from an offensive standpoint. They still struggle with turnovers. They still struggle to shoot the ball from outside. Those have been kind of the two themes, I think, since Tom Crean has been there. But overall, like they're a team that's, I think, really improved. And you know what? If you're a coach and you're trying to build a program, and you've got a lot of younger guys on there too, that's got to be something that Tom Crean probably feels pretty good about because they are finishing the season pretty strong. And again, I want to just sort of throw out that Alabama one because I think, as we've said, LSU's seen what Alabama can do when they get going. I think Georgia just ran into that same situation where you're playing on the road and you're playing a team that is the best team in the league, and it's just, I don't know. I think that Georgia's shown their potential. They've got some good young players they can build on moving forward, and I think it's just a matter of seeing how they finish here, coming up with these last couple games or so.
Well, the difference last night, maybe Justin Kier. I mean, I guess when there's 10 points, you don't put it on one player, but a 10-point difference that is. But he was a really good player at George Mason. He has really been hit and miss, especially lately at Georgia. But 16 and 5 last night in 35 minutes and 6 and 7 from the field. If you're looking at one guy, Ken Palm had him as the MVP in last night's game. So that's one thing. Like if he starts to play at that level every night, which he's capable of doing, then all of a sudden that team is a little better than we all thought.
Yep, agreed. And I think it's just, they've got some different pieces on that roster that you kind of look at and say, man, this, you can see the potential there. I think it's that same conversation, though, that we've had when we talk about Vanderbilt and some of these other teams that are trying to fight their way up from the bottom is you can get better as a team, but you've still got to be able to eclipse all these other teams that are getting better too. And that's what I think Georgia's facing right now. And again, we could have the conversation all day about Mark Fox and kind of what he did there and, what the differences are between what Tom Crean's done thus far. But I mean, Georgia's just been in a spot where, they've had to kind of fight their way back up from that bottom tier in the SEC. And again, it's just not always easy to do because you're going up against other programs that are getting better too. And sometimes it takes a little longer. And I think for a lot of people, maybe they thought that Tom Crean would have already kind of got them there at this point. I don't know that I fully thought that. I thought it was going to take 3 or 4 years probably for this team to be rebuilt, maybe the way he wanted it. But I think at least this season, you're seeing some positive things that they can build on going into next year. And, if they were to finish this season as strong as sort of getting some of these wins, maybe they beat a Florida or LSU, then I think, maybe that's something you're really optimistic about if you're a Georgia fan.
Well, they've got a nice little nucleus of KD Johnson, who's a freshman, Severe Wheeler, and Tamani Kamara, who've all been pretty good for them lately. Now, Wheeler's kind of like Vanderbilt Scottie Pippen. When the assist-to-turnover ratio gets a little out of whack, which it can at times, things can go sideways for them. But that's a pretty good little trio to build a program on.
Yeah, and I think that, he's going to recruit well, too. I mean, I think it's something where, I'd have to look up what their class looks like for next season. But I think he's going to have some opportunities just based on location and stuff like that. And we've already seen him bring in some good players. Like we said, I mean, you've seen what KD Johnson, he's really come along here since he started, back in mid-January. And so I do think that, again, I know Georgia fans, and that's the thing too, is when you're in the SEC, you look around and say, all right, why can't we be Alabama? Why weren't we the team that all of a sudden jumped up and we're the best team in the league by far right now? Or why couldn't we be Arkansas to kind of get back on track and have 7 in a row and do what Muss has done in such a short amount of time? I just think programs are at different levels. And when, Tom Crean took over at Georgia, I guess, how do you compare to maybe where the Alabama program was after the Avery Johnson era, or the, Arkansas program after the Mike Anderson era, which, by the way, Mike Anderson doing a really good job this year at St. John's. I think that's something that you have to consider. It's not always just why can't we be them, or why is that not us, or we should be there instead of Alabama. There's a lot of things go into it. And I think that, again, for me, when I saw Tom Crean take the job, I think you initially thought that for Georgia to be a true SEC title type contender, it was going to take several years, I think, of trying to sort of rebuild how they did some things. And that's coming from someone who thought Mark Fox did a pretty good job there. But I don't think they ever reached that upper level that probably a lot of people thought that if you're a Georgia fan, that's where you wanted to get to. And they just didn't get to that point.
Yeah. Mark Fox committed the Andy Kennedy sin, which is always be right around 500 and never really be too bad, but also never be really good either. You're better if you're going to hover around 500. Have an 11-5 offset by a 5-11 rather than a bunch of 9-7s and 8-8s.
Yeah, and that's what we said too. Is I've always said that, especially now in this SEC landscape, is you kind of be careful what you wish for sometimes, because being in that middle and being there for a long time is oftentimes better than maybe just completely falling off, because there is, and I say this so many times, but like there is so little room for error now in this league. And I think it's something where that was one of the things I talked about whenever those two programs in particular, Georgia and Ole Miss, made moves. And look, as I've said, Tom Crean, Kermit Davis, two very accomplished coaches. And again, those programs, if you talk about their trajectory, you would have to think that they're heading upward at this point. But I also say, you're always taking a risk and you're always taking a chance when you say, okay, we're in that middle tier, but we think we can get to that upper tier. We think we can get up there with the traditional teams. Maybe not to be Kentucky every year, be Florida, since I think those are still probably the two teams over the long haul that have been maybe as relevant at the top over the past, I don't even know what the number would be of years, but it's you're still always taking a risk, because as we've seen with other programs, and yes, we're probably gonna go back to Vanderbilt here, just because they're the one that has sort of bottomed out at one point, whereas I think a lot of the others, they've had some really, really down years. But I just think it's something where you're always going to take that risk. And, sometimes maybe you get to that next level. Sometimes maybe you stay about where you were when you made a coaching change. Or sometimes maybe you just go completely in the opposite direction. So that goes along with it. There's no guarantees, I think. No matter who you hire, I don't think there's ever any guarantees when you're playing in a league like this. And again, you could say that if you're in the Big 12 or the ACC or any of those, the competition is so high, the recruiting is so high to where there's no guarantees, no matter who you hire, that your program's going to all of a sudden just go up and be a consistent winner within 2 or 3 years. So
2 games tonight, I guess I would say, of mild intrigue. Kentucky Vandy is virtually meaningless other than to the fan bases, although that could be a sneaky good game considering how the first matchup in Lexington went, and considering that both teams are coming off wins and are playing decently well. The more interesting one to me, because it's got ramifications if it goes sideways for Tennessee, is the Vols in South Carolina. And South Carolina, as we have said, the spikes and valleys for that program this year have been as pronounced as any team in the league. The problem for Carolina is this one's on the road in Knoxville, but Tennessee has lost a couple at home, and Carolina did beat Florida in Gainesville when it was in the midst of just laying some stinkers. And so I don't know, maybe some intrigue with that one, Blake.
Yeah, I think so. And we kind of laughed about the whole rock fight thing on Tuesday's episode of the podcast, but I really could see this game maybe being a little bit of a grind for Tennessee and South Carolina on both, because as we've said, they both, I think, been inconsistent on the offensive side at times. And I just think with the way Tennessee plays defense, they should be able to control this game. I think they should be able to really force South Carolina, into making some mistakes, really making it hard for them on the offensive side. Because if you look at, South Carolina's offensive numbers, they're not good. And so I think this could be sort of that grinded out type game where South Carolina could really struggle to get good looks, to get good shots. And so I would tend to think, and we said this, it seems like, about some of the other games, but I tend to think this is one of those matchups for South Carolina just does not feel like a good matchup because of the way Tennessee plays defense. And so I really feel like if you're the Vols, this is a game you need to come out and sort of convincingly take over pretty early, because I think if they can do that, I just don't know that I can see South Carolina packing enough of a punch to be able to make a huge rally. Whereas a team like Georgia, made that late rally against Tennessee to lose by 8 or whatever it was after being down a lot of points. I think this is a matchup that tends to favor Tennessee in a pretty big way, at least on defense, and being able to kind of counter what South Carolina can do on offense. So if you're a Tennessee fan, that's what I would probably say is you really have got to hope that this, and look, playing a South Carolina team, Frank Martin team is never easy, but I just think when you look at the matchups, this should be a game Tennessee should control. And if you want to feel better and you're a Tennessee fan, I really do think this is one where they need to come out and really maybe put in a pretty convincing effort here to get a big win.
I would not be shocked if Tennessee lost. I would be very surprised. I guess that's a good way to put it. I think if you play this game 5 times, Tennessee probably wins 4. But what makes this one interesting is I think if you take the 14 teams in the league and divide them up on offense and defense, I think that the variance between what you get between Carolina on a good night defensively and a bad night defensively, and what you get from Tennessee on a good night offensively and a bad night offensively, the variance between those two teams on those various sides of the floor are about as wide as you could pick for any team on any side in this league. And I think that's where this, if it gets interesting, that's why.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I agree with that. I think that if you're better, I would stay away from this game because I don't know that I trust. Both teams have just kind of proven that you don't really always know you're going to get from them, and so I'm with you on that. I don't think that this is a game that's going to be easily predictable. I just think when you look at the numbers like this, I just feel like Tennessee should be able, if they want to really get back on track here after that loss to LSU. I feel like this is a game that they have to win, and I would be surprised probably if Tennessee doesn't really grind this out and really make South Carolina struggle on offense and maybe even hold this South Carolina team to 60 or something like that, because I just think that Tennessee is really good on defense, even if their offense isn't there. I don't know. I just feel like this is one that should favor the Vols and maybe like in a double-digit type manner.
Yeah, and by the way, I said 4 out of 5 off the top of my head. Ken Palm has got this as an 83% chance for a Tennessee win, so I'm pretty close, I guess.
Yeah.
Kentucky, and boy, it seems like this is a broken record because people have said this all year. Is this the team that's finally maybe getting it together a little bit coming into Nashville?
I think if you just look at how they played probably the past, I don't know, 3 weeks or so, I think that they're figuring things out. But I feel like they're one too, to where, we always talk about John Calipari teams kind of, getting to that point in February where it's like, all right, you don't want to play them. But I think this team was at such a disadvantage because, the whole offseason thing, a completely new roster, literally, aside from one player, and they just had to completely change everything that they did. And maybe this is that point where, okay, they're finally starting to, I don't even want to say hitting their groove because, they're 6-13 and they've still lost 4 in a row before they beat before they beat Auburn. So I don't want to say that they're hitting their groove, but I think they're figuring some things out. And you would hope if you're John Calipari and you're going into your 20th game here this season that your team is starting to figure some things out. So I think that's one of the things I look at with them, to where, would it surprise me if Kentucky has a pretty strong finish here? I don't think so. But I also think about, I've seen this team play, 19 games, and I still look at them and say, I'm still to the point to where when a game gets close, I look at who's on the other side, and in a game like this, if this game is close, I'm probably going to say, well, I think Scottie Pippen's probably going to make enough plays to let Vanderbilt get a win here, which is crazy to think about because Vanderbilt has obviously struggled too. But I don't know. I just don't trust Kentucky in some of these games. And I know they won that close game against Auburn, but we talked about it. I mean, they really almost gave that one away. Then they lost, the close game to Arkansas. They lost that close game against Missouri a couple weeks ago. So I just don't think this is a team I want to be banking on in a close game because whether it's inexperience Whether it's just, the chemistry, I don't know. But I still look at this and say, if they find themselves in a close game, I don't know. Like, are they going to be able to find enough plays to win it? Because if we look at kind of what they've done to this point in the season, I think the numbers kind of show that more often than not, they've struggled to win games like that. And maybe they just don't have, those types of performances in 2 or 3 point games late that you are used to with this Kentucky program.
Well, the criticism for Kentucky has been on the offensive side of the ball. It just has not materialized as well as we thought it would. But BJ Boston is the guy on that team that I think has borne the brunt of expectations or not lived up to them, I guess, is the best way to put it. But he's had his best 2 offensive games this year coming in. So I guess if you're Kentucky, what you're hoping is that you come out with the win and Boston has a third good game, because then maybe you've got a case that things are starting to fall into place headed towards the SEC tournament.
Yeah, because he's the one that everything needs to go through if they want to have success. So, I mean, it is, and I think their schedule too is interesting here the rest of the way. As we said, they've got Vanderbilt tonight, then they've got to go to Tennessee, then they've got Texas A&M, Florida, and Ole Miss. So, I mean, they've got some winnable games the rest of the way, and I mean, you could certainly see them going 3-2, or I mean, really, I guess realistically, like they could go 4-1, and we get into the SEC tournament. I'm telling you right now, Chris, if they go 4-1 to finish the regular season, we're going to get into the SEC tournament, and there are going to be a lot of people that say, "Oh boy, like this is it." Like I can see Kentucky making a run here, and they're gonna get into the NCAA tournament with like I don't even know what their record would be at that point, 14-13 or something like that. But yeah, I think that it's certainly a possibility that they could finish strong. But I don't know. I just think the sample size, I'm still on the side of I'll believe it when I see it with this team being able to really find a way to string together consistency, because outside of that 3-0 start in SEC play, when you just look at the, obviously they've lost 13 games, but they just have not been consistent enough to put together back-to-back wins since they did it, with that 3-game stretch in early January. So I don't know if that I'm still there with them, and I'm with you. I think this could be a sneaky good game, though, here at Vanderbilt.
Well, the first time the difference there was Olivier Sarr just lit Vanderbilt up, and the Commodores have been awful against defending the post. But the wild card for Vandy is that Cleveland Brown has had 2 really good back-to-back games, and he had a 5-steal game 2 games ago and a 5-block game last game. And all of a sudden, and I mean, look, it's so out of line of the rest of his season, but that's the other wild card for that one is how that shapes up, because Sarr just killed them in the post last time. But if Cleveland Brown shows up like that, then it's a different story, perhaps.
It is, and I think one of the things Kentucky does well too is, and they always have seemingly, I think with him there and the players he's gotten there, which makes sense because you have a lot of those future NBA power forwards or centers. I mean, they always do well in the offensive glass, and I think Kentucky rebounding, they still have the length here with this team. I mean, they've still got the size, and that's something that Vanderbilt is certainly going to have to try to figure out a way to match up with, because winning the rebounding edge against Kentucky, I think usually gives you a pretty good signal towards maybe potentially winning the game, because that is something that they do well. So I think that's the key for Vanderbilt is certainly you have to be on the glass, and I think make Kentucky shoot as many threes as they can, because while they hit what they hit against Auburn, you're just not going to see that every game, and so that's still the path to success. Probably, if you're a team trying to play Kentucky, is you want to try to make them shoot it from outside, because even though their 2-point percentages are just awful, I still think making them shoot a lot of shots on the perimeter is the best path to success.
Well, Blake, my window of time to do this is about to expire. The natives are getting restless, as you may have heard earlier on the snow day at the Lee household. So let's wrap this sucker up with parting thoughts and of course, tell people where to follow us on Twitter and where to get the podcast.
Yep, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, any podcast app you use, you should be on there now. Search for The 14 or Southeastern 14. You'll be able to find us using that. And as Chris has mentioned before, go ahead and leave us a nice 5-star rating and review. That just helps us reach more people. And we're really just thrilled with everyone's feedback thus far. A lot of great feedback, not just on the reviews, but on Twitter and such as well. So we appreciate that. And so go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll have the website coming soon. And you can follow us on Twitter until then at 14 Southeastern.
Yeah, baseball coverage also coming soon. Again, had a little delay with that, but expect to get that resolved very soon. That's coming with SEC baseball just 2 days away.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you for listening. Tell a friend, and we'll catch you again on the 14 tomorrow. I'm Chris Lee. He's Blake Lovell. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again on Thursday.